To remind our audiences, they had also said that they are going to start hitting the inside of Kiev. And we've already seen that immediately after they gave that warning, we saw the TV tower in Kiev, the tallest building in Kiev, actually proceed to get attacked. These are all updates from yesterday. The war is now entering another day in Kiev. Keep in mind that in Kiev, it is about 3.5 hours behind the time it is in India. So early in the morning right now of a new day of fighting for people in Ukraine. So those are the most recent updates. As you can see around the capital of Kiev right now, fighting continues for another day in Kiev, and fresh Russian bombardments have been taking place. As we just said, it's been causing large explosions in Kiev and different parts of Kiev. Kiev and Kharkiv. Kharkiv is the second largest city in Ukraine. These are both the cities that over the last few days have been the focus of attack. Kiev is, of course, right on top of the list of Russian priorities right now. It's the capital. The Ukrainian president is focused over there along with his family. He has already said that he remains the Russians' #1 target. Now, we actually have two guests with us this morning to bring us a lot more context on this story. Good morning to both of you. I'm going to just give our audiences a light introduction. On the top, we have Ashok Sajjanar. He's a former diplomat. He's with us. We also have Alok Bansal, the director of the India Foundation. Good morning to both of you. Mr. Sajjanar, I want to come over to you first. So just a few minutes ago, for our audiences, we played out US President Joe Biden's State of the Union address. And he spent, almost the first 20 minutes of that State of the Union address talking about and addressing Ukraine. Now, critics will talk about perhaps that being an effort to distract from the American economy problems. America is facing some of the highest inflation it's seen. But I just want to ask you, in that speech that he gave, one of the things he talked about was the shutting down of American airspace to Russian flights. I want to ask you, this is another sanction coming in. These extra sanctions we're seeing coming in the last few hours, are these at all a surprise for Russia? Are there just more sanctions planned in the next few days till we see some kind of abatement of military action?
Yes, thank you very much and good morning to you. I think over the last few days, from the 24th onwards when the attack, when the invasion started, we have seen sanctions being imposed virtually every day from all members of the Western Alliance. And not only the Western Alliance, I think from Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, etc. So there has been a ramping up of sanctions from all over. And as President Biden just now said, even countries, neutral countries like Switzerland have also joined in. So I would imagine that there would be this ramping up of sanctions will continue for the next few days. Now, as far as your question, whether Mr. Putin expected these sort of sanctions, of course, he would have known that there would be sanctions coming, and he tried to insulate himself and to, get this arsenal, financial arsenal of about $640 billion in reserves, so that he could weather this storm and weather all these sanctions. But possibly it appears that, Mr. Putin erred on the fact that he would meet such stiff resistance on the ground from the Ukrainian forces and also the Ukrainian people, that they would come, and this would, Mr. Zelensky would be able to galvanize the whole country to stand up against Russia. I think that was a miscalculation. He possibly thought that, with the small task force that he sent in the beginning, he would be able to steamroll. That has not happened. And the second is also on the extent of sanctions, because possibly he miscalculated on the fact that there is interdependence between Russia and Europe, Russia and the world, particularly as far as its energy exports are concerned, its gas exports, oil exports, coal, so many other things. And he thought that it would be mutual pain if this pain was inflicted on Russia. The other side, other parties would also have to face the pain, feel the pain, and they might not be prepared for this. But here also he seems to have miscalculated, because I think the sort of sanctions and the ramping up and the increasing severity and depth and the increase in the spectrum of sanctions, that has been growing, and that must have taken Mr. Putin quite by surprise. We've seen the central bank being sanctioned. You just now mentioned about the airspace, and yes, that is also because now if it starts biting the individuals, Putin himself has been sanctioned, Lavrov, all the oligarchs, I think this is going to have an impact on the top leadership. And of course, the people are suffering because the ruble has taken a huge hit, and we've seen this serpentine queues in front of ATMs in Russia because everyone wants to get money out, everyone wants to get their reserves, so to say, their savings in dollars or in hard currency. And ruble is becoming increasingly worthless currency. So I think this would be a cause for great worry, but of course we'll have to see how much China is willing to step in, because if they are able to conduct their trade in Chinese yuan or in even in blockchain currencies, we'll have to see how things shape up in the coming days and weeks.
Mr. Sajana, that, where you've left it right now is actually where I want to take the question to Alok right now, who's with us. Mr. Bansal, Mr. Sajana just talked about possibly China stepping in and helping out here. Could you tell our audiences a little bit about what that could look like? But the second question I also wanted to ask you was, obviously, there's some hopes that a second round of talks may also take place today between Ukraine and Russia. For our audiences, tell us what could have changed between that first talk and the second talk, for us to expect any kind of different outcome, because the first one, neither side left with a concrete outcome. What could change?
See, when the first talks happened, nobody expected an outcome immediately. Right. In fact, first talks was de facto to prepare ground for another round of talks subsequently, and that is what is happening now. So the second round is far more important than the first round because in first round, the two countries were talking in the midst of a war, which itself was a great thing. And I think the first round of talks, the two countries were gauging each other's position. And I think we need to understand that talks are important at this point of time for both countries. Ukraine definitely wants a ceasefire, but more significantly, even Putin at this stage is having a problem because the way he had expected that the war would go has not gone. And the Ukrainians, after an initial setback, have put in a stiff fight. Though please understand, Russian military is far, far stronger. But each day that the war progresses, the economic sanctions and the other international isolation starts biting Russia. Now, as far as China moving in is concerned, I think that is, to my mind, presumptuous, because China has maintained some sort of a stoic silence after initial support for Russia. And we have about 5,000 to 6,000 Chinese nationals still stranded in Ukraine. And there have been instances of the local Ukrainians giving them a little tough time because the China's support for Russia is well known. So this is as far as Chinese support for Russia is concerned. But as I said, the Russian economic situation will continue to worsen with each passing day because the sanctions are biting. Also, the Ukrainian military will get bolstered as far as hardware is concerned, with hardware coming in from different parts. So Russia's objective, which has been the major city of Kyiv, that is the capital, as well as Kharkiv, which is the second biggest city, they have not yet been able to capture. Though Russians have made significant progress from the Crimean front, from where one of their offensive has virtually taken over the complete coast of Ukraine along the Sea of Azov, all the way up to Donetsk region, which is the breakaway republic. So at some stages they have made progress, but their main thrusts have really not moved as forward as was expected. And this particular convoy, which you are talking of about stopping just outside Kyiv, we need to understand that armored columns, especially when there are big armored columns, they need refueling at regular intervals. And I think they carry with them their own fuel train, a convoy of fuel tankers. So I think they must have stopped somewhere to fuel up or something like that. Or they are probably waiting for the night or waiting for this particular second round of negotiations that takes place. Or this could only be a pressure tactics, because please understand, this armored column, if it goes into the built-up area, it is going to cause huge mayhem, but it will also be fairly vulnerable from attack from various buildings and built-up area on these armored vehicles.
Alok,